Hello everybody, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Serrated Cucumber. Life is Strange True Colours is right around the corner with the entire game set to release on September 10th. Time and time again, I found myself thrilled and eager when watching the pre-release footage of the game, both the trailers and the gameplay itself we've seen showcasing Alex's empath powers. True Colours seems to be shooting for the stars. It seems to be going to be the magnum opus of the series. The scale and ambition is unlike anything we've ever seen before. Of course, the trailer showcases well enough some of the improvements technically. The shift in graphical style is evident from the get-go, but there is still so much we're unaware of, so much that won't be answered until September 10th, which is when we will all inevitably binge the entire series in the span of a few days. And so, next comes the theory gazing, looking up at the stars and picking out what we each want to see from the next title in the franchise. There's a little novelty in that, of course. And, while our expectations may not match reality, the game could become something none of us are expecting. We all have our little hopes and expectations in place, and so that's why I thought that I'd share some of mine with you today. It'll be nice to look back on this video in a few months to see how right and how wrong I was about certain things. And so, let's get into the video. Just as a forewarning, I will be referring back to certain story beats from older Life is Strange games. If you haven't played those blind, I highly recommend doing so in the month up to release date of True Colours. With that out of the way, let's begin. Number 1. Flashbacks. Flashbacks have been a part of the Life is Strange franchise as far back as 2015. Of course, it makes sense that a game centered around time travel would make good use of flashbacks. Life is Strange the original gave implication to the flashbacks featured. Since Max was revisiting these places in time, it meant the flashbacks were not only a thematic touch, but a whole relevant plot beat in itself. Life is Strange 2 featured one use of a flashback, although this was for exposition between Sean and Daniel and didn't really amount to much besides narrative world building. That said, True Colours would benefit so strongly from detailed flashbacks, and to understand why, you have to take a look at the setup for each of the stories. Max's relationship with Chloe can be explored in photos. You don't need a detailed description of their childhood relationship because they've been estranged for a few years and Max is never expected to meet Chloe again before the events of Life is Strange. The introduction of them as estranged childhood friends was enough to sate the player and have them understand the dynamic. They were meeting again for the first time as entirely different people than they had been 5 years before. Sean and Daniel also needed very little exposition. They're brothers with a regular sibling dynamic, fighting, babysitting, blah blah blah. You know the story. But Alex's story is very different. There's clearly a lot that's happened in her life so far, which is relevant to the plot going forward. We know very little about it. With Max and Chloe, there's assumptions to be made about their childhood friendships, but in the case of Alex, we know nothing. Her brother ended up in a juvenile detention centre at a young age, and Alex ended up finding herself in foster care. The fates of both of her parents are, thus far, ambiguous, but the game has this heavy focus with Alex coming to terms with her curse and using it to understand not only her brother's death, but also to understand herself and to grow as a person. It would be a foul crime then if this did not explore untapped traumas. Surely Alex will feel a lot of strong emotions when Gabe dies, and she has nothing to know of him during her teens. She will likely think back to her childhood when remembering him, as these are the only memories she has, fragments of her past. I would fully expect the game to explore this idea of looking back to move forward. Alex, while she seems adjusted, still appears to have some issues with people, and the root cause of this should be explored in order to give depth and understanding to her character. Therefore, I could not see this game not having a few flashbacks. I do think it's interesting to note too that Alex may be able to see the flashbacks of other people through her Nova power. The ability to understand why folks are feeling a certain way might involve probing their memories, and this is definitely an expectation rather than a hope. I do think this will happen. Number 2. Please cut back on the trauma porn. Life is Strange 2, as great of a game as I believe it is, was absolutely mired in tragedy. Episodes such as number 4, which had Sean arguably at his lowest and continuing to be beaten down physically and mentally, were at parts hard to watch. Of course, there are benefits to telling a story like this, but Life is Strange True Colours really needs to tone back on this. It's my hope that True Colours will focus less on why Alex is fucked up in the head and more how she moves on from it. Even in the good endings of Life is Strange 2, the tone was still bogged with overarching sadness and cruelty. It portrayed Mexico as this depressing place for them to live, and redemption was fucking heartbreaking. I'd much rather see Alex experience the positive benefits of mental wellness, from having her highs to rival her lows. In Life is Strange 2, every single favourable moment felt like a rare thing that could be snatched away without warning. That game was so anxiety-inducing to play for that reason. Of course, the game needs stakes. I'm not looking to tone it down to tell me why levels, but I'm not looking for Alex to get shot by a drug dealer. I want the game to focus on her development as a person. I want to feel proud as she overcomes things and she lets go of the little things that upset her. And this goes for endings too. Of course, there's never going to be a 100% perfect ending, but I'd like some better endings where I can live happy with the results of my game and feel like my choices made a good difference. I'll touch a little more on endings later in the video, but it's critical that they sprinkle in the tragedy and don't pour it from a giant bottle. Seriously, I cannot handle another Life is Strange 2, my blood pressure is high enough. Number 3. Balanced romance options. True Colours is the first Life is Strange game that has been upfront with the advertisement of romance options from the get-go. This game seems centred on pressing that both Stephanie Gingrich and Ryan Lucan are Alex's potential love interests. Alex has been confirmed as canonically bisexual, and we've received videos advertising both possible routes. I think it's safe to say then that romance is a central theme of this game, a focal point, a B-plot if you will. And so with this, it brings some questions and expectations to light that I'd expect because the Life is Strange franchise does not have the best track record for love options. There are a few criteria that I'd say they should be aiming to meet with Ryan and Steph. First, the romance options should be balanced and equally appealing for different reasons. Life is Strange and Life is Strange 2 both missed the mark on this one. The difference in balance between Warren and Chloe was astounding, and while I agree that I don't like Warren, he was also presented as a romance option, just nowhere near to the scale of Chloe, a really unbalanced weighting. Now, of course, there's nothing wrong with the developers giving the character a canonical love interest, but in a game that's all about choices, I'd seriously expect Ryan and Steph to be different in this regard. Now, I know that the chances that most of the fanbase is naturally going to romance Steph, both for the women loving women romance dynamic that so many fell in love with the franchise for, and because Steph is a beloved character that hails all the way back from 2017. But this doesn't mean that Ryan should be sidelined. I would still like to be given cause to romance him too, but, and this is big, I don't want Ryan's content to be beefed up to compensate for the fan service of Steph scenes. I would much rather they just be equally weighted, or that they should change depending on who you spend the most time with. Now, what of a polyamory route? If you wanted to experiment, dipping your toes into both relationships, I think this should be something that's accommodated, that the player should not be forced into making a long-term relationship commitment at Alex's young age of 21. Of course, I don't think that all three of them could be in a relationship together since Steph is canonically gay, but Alex is at this age of discovery, away from where she's grown up in a place full of new excitement and wonder. If the player chooses to have Alex explore both options, I don't think that they should be punished. And equally, I would love for there to be an option where Alex romances neither, and to have this be equally weighted to the relationship path. A golden trio dynamic where the three are best friends would be something that's so far unexplored in the Life is Strange franchise. Think about it, we've only ever had duo main character dynamics. It would be so much fun to see the three of them bouncing off each other, how their personalities clash and complement one another. Different scenes for friendships versus romances. Perhaps instead of kissing Steph after the performance or giving Ryan a flower, the three would embark to the Black Lantern for some drinking games and rounds with the locals. I don't want the game to miss out on content because the player chose not to romance Steph or Ryan. Number 4. Actual story branches with choices that affect the rest of the game in a significant way. It's no secret that True Colours has a vastly increased budget over the previous 3 installments of Life is Strange. All you need to do is take one look at the trailers, the visuals, facial animations, and the ability and confidence to release the game all at once instead of in an episodic nature. It's certain that Square Enix has given Deck 9 quite the budget. Considering what they could deliver with their assumingly limited budget for Before the Storm, it's clear that the studio can deliver results. Now, of course, we've already seen the results of this visually, but what about narratively? Now, I'm not expecting Detroit Become Human levels of branching storyline here, but I would enjoy for episodes to be significantly different based on major choices made earlier in the game, for folks to go down different directions and have very different gameplay. Life is Strange has never been a series with much replayability, but the series no longer exists as a proof of concept. It's in the full swing of its most ambitious release ever, and I think we should start expecting these things to change with time. If you want an example, think of visiting Kate Marsh in the hospital, an entirely different scene based on your choices earlier in the game. If Don't Nod could accomplish this in 2015, Deck 9 can sure as hell expand on it in 2021. The idea of certain scenes changing, as I mentioned, based on love interests and such, is something that could be expanded to just more than romantics. The ability to wander Haven Springs and choose how you spend the afternoon is something that would amaze me, kind of like a Persona game, where the overarching story is complemented by a day-to-day style, where you can learn different things from spending time with different characters. This would bulk out the story beyond just linear cutscenes, and it would make it feel like the player is driving the plot rather than the other way around. With this being a consistent criticism of Life is Strange 2, I can imagine folks would take kindly to having this level of control and drive in the narrative. Consequence should matter. Life is Strange 2 did this really well on both a small scale, with certain bits of information and relationships changing your interactions with characters, and also on a larger scale, so think Daniel continuing to swear. Life is Strange 1 was pretty much devoid of this, with most episodes looking and sounding exactly the same, save for a few changes in dialogue. True Colours should expand on this, to have decisions impacting the environment and the people in it. Of course, again, I'm not expecting AAA quality, but the game is at the point in this series where this becomes a great hope of mine, that I'll be able to watch two streamers play this game and see distinctive changes between the two, see them both have a completely different experience, not just based on major choices, but also on the folks they choose to hang out with, how they dress Alex, etc. The small things matter, which brings me to my final point. Number 5. More endings are good, but more variants are better. I'm expecting True Colours to have 4 or more endings, that much is certain. If it had less, I'd find myself a bit disappointed. However, it's my great hope that these 4+ endings will have distinct subcategories. Deck 9 did this with Before the Storm. Your actions throughout the story affected the folks around you and changed the world of Arcadia Bay slightly, whether Nathan and Samantha got together, whether Chloe was friendly with David, whether Sarah met Rachel. Of course, this was at the expense of having an ending choice that didn't really feel like it mattered much. But True Colours can take this same idea and produce it on a much bigger scale. Now, look at Life is Strange 2 for comparison. Sure, some tiny details change, like tattoos, items on shelves, but the only scene that is character dependent is Lila's appearance at Sean's release. Of course, we got wildly different endings as a result, which is something I really liked. But please, show us endings where Alex stays in Haven, one where she goes to college, another where she travels, something like that, it would be great. But going back to Life is Strange 2, could you imagine if your actions towards Karen had, say, impacted whether she got in contact with Claire and Steven in parting ways? Or if your relationship with Karen depended on her visiting you in Mexico, which would be shown in Blood Brothers? Or if they had shown Jacob and his sister in the ending depending on your choices? This is the thing. Life is Strange 2 neglected side characters so much that it worsened the impact of the endings, which focused so heavily on the brothers. I think that with the return to roots and improve on them attitude Deck 9 seems to be employing, we'll likely have more character influence on the endings and vice versa. But I just want to see lots of endings with lots of variation. The game has the scope, it has the ambition, this could happen. But that is just my opinion. What are you expecting, and is there anything that I've said that you agree with? Let me know in the comments. I do read all of your comments and I use some of them as inspiration for my future videos. But as always, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe if you'd like to see more True Colours and narrative game content from me in the future. As always, remember to keep your cucumbers serrated and have a nice day.